BitShares is a world-class blockchain like Bitcoin with a digital currency platform boasting enterprise-level scalability and throughput with separations of power and self-governance baked in. Need the power of a blockchain with the stability of a dollar? We invented it and tested it for 3 years. Want to make a loyalty token, coupon, or shares in your business? We have you covered. Wish to add world-class development? This tech can fund your work. Whether for an everyday entrepreneur or computer-savvy code guru, BitShares provides tools to empower a world of unapologetic innovators to wield and share value with a level of freedom once thought impossible. Meet a community of such innovators every Friday at 2 p.m. UTC, led by Chris Herring and Fuzzy, to play a role in the evolution and advancement of this state-of-the-art project. Welcome to the BitShares revolution. You just leveled up. Welcome everyone to another BitShares Hangout, part of the Beyond Bitcoin Hangout series, but this is a hangout that's specifically for BitShares. The day is Friday, March 24th, 2017, and we're going to be joined today by the BitShares community, where we're going to talk about a few items that Chris4210 has left for me today because he has a meeting at this specific time. So I'm going to be filling in for him on this occasion, and I'm going to go through the agenda, and then we can, of course, discuss however you guys want to go, what the directions you want to take the discussion. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started on Chris's agenda. The 4 items on the agenda are welcoming the new committee member, which is Fav. There are going to be other committee members who are going to be added to BitShares, or that we're at least going to be looking at trying to bring into the BitShares committee. The next one is going to be the witness update report, and then we're going to follow that by BM rumors. What is BM rumors? I'm not quite sure what everybody here is thinking about or hearing about, so we can get into that after that. And then we're going to move into community building activities and what we can do to kind of help BitShares build and strengthen our community, which, you know, this is something that we all love to do. So otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? So with that said, let's go ahead and let's start with, does anybody know currently the specific individuals who are going to be running for committee for certain? I have a list of them, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say all of them right now, but this would be a good place to maybe ask you guys. Crickets. I've heard of 3 people. I've heard one is going to be, well, obviously, Fav. We have another person, Johnny Bitcoin. He's interested in becoming a committee member. And I think that Ronnie's considering it, but I don't know for sure. That's where my knowledge kind of ends on it. But let's go ahead and then, you know, if anybody has anything to say, I'll go ahead and give you a little pause to go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I'll move on.
You mentioned something about you're not sure whether or not you should mention who's running right now. Well, I mean, it's a public thing, so I don't think there should be any reservations about saying who's running for committee member. Publicity is what they're looking for.
Maybe it's a good idea to review a little bit about what the responsibilities and the position of a committee member is in BitShares, just for people who don't know.
You know, that's actually that's on the agenda as soon as we're done. That's what I was gonna do, since it seemed like everybody was kind of in a place where they didn't know all the details, which I suspect it's because this stuff is happening right. Oh, Gian is another person. who's, I think, looking at it. And he's from Bit Capital, I believe. But yeah, let's go ahead and go into that data. Well, I can go ahead and I can say that committee members are voted in based on the stake that is directed their way in the ecosystem. So BitShares is a stake-weighted voting system. The more shares you have, the more weight you have in voting, the more weight you carry in the ecosystem, which we've found is pretty much the best way to do it, because otherwise you have the potential to give people, well, let's just say there's a lot of problems that come along with it. So where many different chains will have like a foundation, right? They're not really decentralized in terms of the governance of that foundation, and they have a core dev team and those people kind of decide. In BitShares, it's a lot more formalized. It's the blockchain enables us to have a committee that gets to propose changes, witnesses that get to essentially sign off on those changes, having consensus and reaching consensus relatively easily, or reaching consensus on an improving iteration of the committee's proposed changes. With that said, we have then the voters who can either have proxies who they trust, like Xerox is a proxy. I think Fav is also a proxy. If there's anybody else here who's a proxy, feel free to plug yourself. But that's for those people who don't want to necessarily do all the research and keep up to date on the specific things with the chain, but they trust somebody to vote for them. So with the committee's kind of, part of that separations of power that is built into BitShares. And the people who join the committee are generally the ones who are going to know the most about BitShares, are going to be the biggest advocates, and some of the all-stars of the community. It's an unpaid position, but there are people who volunteer to do this job. So with that said, that's kind of how the committee works. I know that Data, you are a committee member, so feel free to chime in if there's anything that you would like to say. Maybe if there's any clarifications that you'd like to bring to what I brought to the table, or if anybody else has something, feel free to go ahead.
So my name is Jonathan Bahai. I am a member of the BitShares community. Have been on the committee for quite some time. I wasn't there in the very beginning, but later on was voted in. The responsibilities of the committee are really just to manage the fee structure within BitShares, and for quite some time, the committee hasn't had to do very much. We had a really big rally for, it was a number of months that the committee reviewed every single fee structure within BitShares. And then we set the prices based on USD rates. And since then, there hasn't been any updates. I think we're due for a review, though. The only reason that we were going to do a review was if there was a fluctuation in regards to the price. Since then, though, there hasn't been a great reason to change the fees, but if there is some type of rally or major changes that want to be made, then it's the committee as a whole that is going to vote in any changes like that. Of course, we go through a process where we first take proposals, we discuss it all, we put out exactly what it is that we're looking to do, we get community feedback, and then once that's all set, we then put in the proposed transaction to make those changes, and then there has to be a threshold of voting amongst the entire committee in order for those changes to take place. So there is a number of layers. There isn't necessarily any quote unquote power in a single committee member, but it is a volunteer position, no pay, and it's just a matter of being mindful of the impact that the changes to the fees have, both in security as well as in the marketplace.
Now, isn't it the case that the committee actually brings up, they can bring up other changes that can be or that might need to be made specifically, like maybe inserting certain types of code and things like that, and then the witnesses decide on it by changing to that code base?
No.
Witnesses have no involvement in that. Sorry, committee has no involvement with that. Sorry.
There's a bunch of additional parameters that the committees can vote on. So basically, all they can do is vote on the blockchain parameters, and the fees are part of those blockchain parameters.
Okay.
Besides the fees, there's it's a whole list. Let me get them.
So for each different chain, graphene chain that could be traded on BitShares in the future, the committee's structure and what they can do might change. Would be a fair statement, though.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, there are a couple parameters that are probably going to be BitShares specific, and some other parameters are graphene specific. For instance, what we have changed during our stress test have been the block interval, the maximum block size, and the maximum transaction size. Those will be probably be part of all graphene-based blockchains, those parameters. Then there are parameters for maintaining of the maintenance interval. Then there's stuff for committee proposal, a review period. Then there's some other maximum numbers. For instance, how many witnesses can be there at most? How many committee members can there be at most? How big can authorities be for each account? Like how big can multi-sig groups be? How deep are multi-sig hierarchies actually traveled? Then there's stuff concerning the reserve percentage fee. Then also there's a maximum worker budget per day. Then there's stuff for like the witness pay per day is also something that the committee can change. There's some stuff around the lifetime referral stuff. The network percentage is actually the percentage of the fee that is taken by the network is also part of that. So basically we could raise or reduce that from the 20% that the shareholders or the reserve pool actually obtains from all the transactions. There's a bunch of
I think the best way of boiling it down, Xerox, was how you said it in the very beginning, is it's parameter changes. So these are not inserting extra code in, which obviously the witnesses would have to all be running that code. But the committee gets to can change a lot of parameters.
Basically, the committee is doing the business protocol. Like they are dealing with. Do you know what the controllers are actually? No, it's not a controller. It's really much like dealing with all the business aspects of the deck. Not about the technical aspects, but about the business aspects.
Yeah, it's really well. It's really cool, yeah, because I know that whenever we did the test net, these people were not present, but you kind of act as the committee by changing these parameters, and that's how we tested at various block intervals and saw what the data was from that. It was because you kind of played the role of the committee. It's just kind of, I like to dig into it here because since you mentioned the parameters, that was the best way of describing it, really, in a simple
I agree. I think
way.
the parameters are the best way to describe it. And Xerox, your idea about it being really oriented towards the business aspects of the running of the network is not really technically true, because things like block size, although it obviously does affect the business, is more of a technical parameter of how the network runs.
Yeah, well, tell it to Bitcoin. Seriously, this is for them. This is, well, arguably it's unfair to say that, because the whole economics of Bitcoin are different. A lot different than in our case. They have a fee competition, or a fee. What they call this? A fee market. They call it fee market. And basically, you're competing with others to get a spot in a block. And the more fee you pay, the higher the probability it will be that you get into a block. But we don't have this. Pay a flat fee and you will be in a block. So the whole economics are different here. That's why you are right that the block size and block parameters are not really part of the economics, basically. Yeah, right.
So it does affect the business, obviously. I mean, the everything we're doing here is the business of the DAC. So, I mean, the parameters do affect that, but I think of them more technically because they're really more of the underpinnings of how the network is working. And of course, we're dealing with an economic system, so it's a business as well. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't think the distinction is quite as clear cut as saying that the committee deals with only business decisions and not technical ones.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why I wanted to boil it down, because everybody here was pretty much right to a large degree. It's just the parameters is the way of just targeting it. I think that's the takeaway for anybody who's listening for the committee, because those parameters and maybe even some of the variables that are interacting within those parameters are going to be changed quite often in certain chains or new chains. Like there's a lot of difference between maybe a committee that would work with BitShares and a committee that would work on a different chain. Similarities, but the parameter changes might very much be in some ways different. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Chris was saying last night to me that there was he sent me here something saying that there's a witness update report. Anybody who's a witness have any updates on what's going on the witness front end?
Well, I'm in the process of upgrading all of my nodes, for instance, to more RAM. I'm seeing a lot more network traffic, so that's what I'm in the process of doing right now. Also, the BTS tools that I use to run the witness node has also been upgraded. Other than that, I don't have anything specific to add to the witness report.
Do you run API nodes or just plain full nodes?
Basically, just plain full nodes. They act as seed nodes, or is one of them is the witness. They're pretty interchangeable, but the amount of RAM is different. The seed nodes are running much less RAM than what the witness and the redundant nodes are.
If you want to spare your RAM and you don't want to provide an API node, you can basically do the same trick on BitShares that we did on the testnet to reduce RAM requirements without affecting anything because you're not running an API node. The changes really only affect the API, the full API nodes, and you don't see account and market history. So if you're interested, I just let you know where you were to comment out 2 lines in the code, and then you will have a lot less RAM requirements if you want.
That's very good input. This does bring up a very significant decision that needs to be made, because if some witnesses run these reduced memory requirement nodes and they're not API nodes, I don't advertise mine as an API node or not. It could be. But this will bring a distinction to the witnesses that I don't think we've been privy to before, or that we've been aware of before.
Now, real quick, what do you guys think about the current number of BitShares witnesses?
Well, before we get into that, let's close this topic, because I think this is rather important. I don't know what people decide to do in terms of where they're connecting to the network for API purposes, for example. That's why I think it's important we just talk about that.
API nodes are handed out specifically. They are run specifically on a very specific domain, and that domain is hard coded into the web wallet. That's the drop down menu. So if you want to be part of that list, then you better not comment out those 2 lines that I have in the chat box over there. If you are not part of that list and do not want to use your node as an API node, then you are safe to just remove those or comment those 2 lines, and nothing will change unless except your RAM usage.
Well, that makes good sense as far as being in the list of observed or the public WSS servers. But you could type, at least in the past, you could type anything in. So any one of the witness nodes could be used for that purpose if they have not commented out those 2 lines.
Exactly. If they want to be, well, it's a question of whether you want to offer a public API or just a private API. If you want to have it a public API, then you can be part of that list. If you want to run a private API, then it's just something for you. In both cases, you will need a lot of RAM. Well, a lot. I'm not sure how much that currently is. It's probably some few gigabytes, but not too much. But if you run neither of both and just want to be part of the peer-to-peer network helping in the helping with the transaction stuff, then you can comment out those 2 lines.
Tom?
Well, thanks for that input. I haven't explicitly advertised my nodes as being a public API server, although they have been. Now I'm going to consider this distinction and decide whether or not that I'm going to remove that capability, although people probably aren't using it, so it's probably not that important from the standpoint of what API nodes people decide to connect to. As time moves on, those nodes may become more important, though. The connection points, they're akin to like an Electrum wallet. You connect to a Bitcoin server that's a full node. The Electrum wallet itself is not a full node, doesn't operate as a full node. So these are, as the network traffic increases, I think this is an important distinction to make. Right now, it's probably not so important. So we can move on, I think.
Oh, well, just let me finish real quick by asking a question. You're saying essentially that the more witnesses who do run this way, the more resilient the network's going to be in that service.
Well, I don't know about resilience. It's just a matter of where you can connect to get the information from the blockchain. Right now, those nodes are that people connect to they're pretty much people are only going to use the nodes that are in the wallet by default. So if you wanted to run some other server, you could, but that's more of a tech thing. It's not something that most people are going to think to do. So
there's also one other thing. You can, even if you commented out those 2 lines, you can still use your node as an API node. It will just not have the account history and the market history. You can basically all your historic stuff is empty. I'm not sure. Probably the exchange won't open because it expects to see some of the market history and wants to draw stuff on the market history, but all the other stuff is still working. Well, you don't see any of your history in your account, but you can do transactions, you can change, you can vote, you can withdraw from vesting, you can transfer stuff. Everything works except that you don't see the history of your account nor the history of the market. That's the only 2 things that you will not see if you commented out those things and had a full node running. If you want to see how that actually turns out, you can take a look at the current public for the testnet, which is running a API node that has those 2 lines commented out, and you will see that you can do all the stuff you want to do and do usually, except that all the accounts don't have a history, and nor can you open, probably, I'm not sure, nor can you open the exchange pages because it won't show you the trading history.
Okay, very good. Another important distinction, that it doesn't really affect the API service other than transaction history.
Yeah, I would recommend for seed nodes, I would recommend to do that anyways. I'm not sure. You can probably even comment out the 3 lines because there's 1 line above it, which is the witness plugin, and that plugin isn't needed anyways in neither of those cases. So not for the APIs nor for local stuff. It's only required for the witness nodes. So witness nodes can probably comment out the 2 lines. Everyone else can comment out all 3 lines. Good, if they wanted to and don't need the history stuff. Oh yeah, furthermore, if it happens at some point that you need these history stuff, then you can just recompile the stuff and replay the whole blockchain. Then you will see all the history, like the data is gone. In fact, I think that there's probably code that we can borrow from Steam because they have moved the configuration for these plugins into the configuration file, so you wouldn't need to recompile the whole thing, but just change the config file to enable and disable specific plugins. I bet that Vikram or some other C++ developer can easily just do the same thing for the BitShares witness node.
Well, if you guys don't mind, since we're still on this topic, and it is an important topic, and I'm kind of getting into it myself, should we, T-Bone's asking, shouldn't we incentivize running full nodes API nodes?
Well, if you can spare the RAM, sure.
So it would probably be worth it for us to expect that if we up the BTS payouts for witnesses, right? I mean, that would be fair, wouldn't it? Since we've done that, or is it extremely resource intensive over time? Like it stores all of the history, and you can't
Yeah, that is exactly what it is doing currently. There are two ways out of this. Either you raise your RAM all the time, or we prune at some point the history, or the third option would be to change the database that is using the RAM and to store the data towards Chainbase, which was developed for Steam. We can use that as well. It's open source, MIT licensed, and basically can be easily, or more or less easily, probably integrated into BitShares to deal with this kind of data.
Would that integration allow one to have a reduced memory footprint node, but also have the history?
What Chainbase what currently happens is that all the required information is kept in RAM. That makes the whole thing very fast. What Chainbase is doing is that it only keeps the important stuff in RAM and puts the not so important stuff onto disk. So you will have basically less requirements in RAM, but you will have more requirements on disk space and disk I/O. It's just like you're moving the trouble out of the RAM requirements into having more I/O on your disk. But it comes with another aspect that is quite nice, and that is if you shut down your node and you restart it again, then it's an instant restart. You can just like shut down the node, do something, change the config stuff, and then start it up again, and it will be there in seconds. That's something that BitShares nodes currently cannot do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up.
Fox made a great point. You can basically sell premium access to your API node by using authorization on the API. That's a very good point.
Huh. That is a cool way of doing it. Now, the question I have is, would enabling people to be paid for running full nodes bring more people on board, kind of like the master node system kind of does? At least, like, I'm talking from like a social perspective. Be interesting to.
Sure, I would think so.
Yeah. I mean, these are the things that I think we should look at and talk about, because I think one of the things that really gets people interested is maybe they can't get in as a witness, but maybe they can run a full node, or or do something else that gets them a little bit of a stake in the system. Because the cool thing about something like a master node is you pretty much just put down the money and you got it, and now you use whatever value propositions are unique to yourself to kind of promote the coin,
Yeah, definitely. And that there are, right, as you said, that there are other options besides just being a witness.
Yeah. I mean, witness would become like the elite thing, like you're an elite dude if you're a witness. But anyway, real quick, there is something that I can bring up here. If everybody is done on this topic, is everybody done on this topic?
I have no more questions.
Okay, well, let's see if we can collectively come up with what ByteMaster's up to. This was something that's on the agenda, so I'm going to run with it. I'll tell you guys what I know from talking to him. I don't think it's because he didn't tell me anything specific because I told him not to yet. But he did ask me a curious question: if I would support something that share drops more than I would support something that ICOs. I told him I would prefer to probably, if I had in the free market to choose, I would probably support both because it's the safer bet, but I would want the share dropping one to win. That was my response. Now, I'll just leave it to you guys, Data, any of you guys, Xerox, Tom, Fox. Does anybody know, or has anybody heard anything that might congeal with what my information is, that might give us an idea of where we're at? I mean, I think we've established that he's got something else he's working on. But I think that's about where it ends.
Share drop versus what? I didn't hear the second part of that.
Versus ICO.
To me, that's an interesting question, that contrast.
Yeah.
Well, to raise money, you cannot actually use share dropping because you don't get anything except, well, some social contract that kind of is non-binding. So if you want to raise money, you cannot solely use the share dropping idea. That's why you usually do ICOs, because you want to collect money for your development. The only thing that you obtain from share dropping is the love from a community. So if you take a look at Edina coin, they have just cloned BitShares, cloned the UI, changed some stuff, and most of the BitShares community just laughing at them because they could have had our support if they had just share dropped a little on us. And that's basically what you can obtain by share dropping on a specific community. Not saying that it needs to be BitShares community entirely. It could also be share dropping on brownie holders, because that's as Stan would say, it's a different demographic. Yeah, right. That's what you get when you're doing share dropping.
You get users when you do share dropping, people who are going to try it out and use it.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps here's one idea that maybe makes sense. What if the ICO were to only accept BitShares for their ICO? Does then that question make more sense?
It's a very bad idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
There's
it depends
a reason
on how you're doing it.
Explain it why, Xerox.
So if you were doing an ICO on BitShares alone, then people would throw all the BitShares at one account. Then you end up in a massive account that has a lot of control over the BitShares network, even though they only wanted to raise funds. So if you were running an ICO on something that does not build on BitShares, then this will end up in a lot of sell pressure, because basically everyone that wants to get in gets in, and ones that collect the BTS want to get out of BTS. So this will be a lot of sell pressure. If you instead wanted to build something on top of BitShares, then you can collect BTS, but you need to be very careful not to collect more than, I don't know, let's say a number 10% of all BTS, because then you would basically obtain the power network, which is, I wouldn't say it's bad, but the crypto crowd usually perceives it as bad if one entity controls a lot of the network, even though the network here is something different than, anyways. Another bad idea, if you ask me, is if you were share dropping entirely on BTS on a specific snapshot date. We have discussed that with data security node for the peer place thing, and that is also why the peer place snapshot was on a random, but at least on a non-known date. The problem here is if you had a snapshot date, people were buying into it, and right after the snapshot, they would sell. Selling BTS is not much the problem, because, well, the price just goes down if the sell. The problem is that we have non-liquid smart assets, smart coin markets, and if you have the price falling too much on the external price, on the external exchanges, because people were selling their stuff after the snapshot and not caring about the BitShares network afterwards, you will end up in black swan events. It could happen that you end up in black swan events on smart coins that, well, didn't want to see that. The ideal thing, actually, if you wanted to use BitShares for fundraising, is either to use Ronnie's Open BTC or even a smart coin to collect the money. But that turns into another problem again, which is that you can settle BitUSD, for instance, but not all at once. There's a limit, and it's not like an easy thing to use any of the BitShares assets to raise a lot of money. If you're talking maybe 1 or 4 million or something, then you can probably, even 4 million is already quite, if it's a couple million, it's probably going to work, but if you're raising a lot more money, then BitShares is certainly not the way to go currently.
Well, there's also the thought that, from a user perspective, a lot of people who are not holding BitShares and really are not too familiar with how we do things, even though it is easier in the long run how we do things, changing and learning that, especially when you see something like the BitShares wallet. If you're a crypto person and you just started in crypto and imagine looking at the BitShares, the Bitcoin wallet, getting used to that, and then going to the BitShares wallet, right? I mean, it's a big jump. From like a psychological perspective in terms of the perception of complexity. So there's that too. I would always want to leave it open as an option, or maybe, hold something like USD later on when the market's even bigger. But I think that accepting BitShares it's dangerous.
What about a variation on that idea? What if the ICO is occurring on the BitShares DEX, but is raising some MPA, such as BitUSD? Is that then a benefit to the community?
It is a short-term benefit to the community because you need to basically first create BitUSD to have it usable in an ICO. It's a disadvantage for the ones that are running the ICO because the liquidity of BitUSD isn't good enough so that you can basically run in something like that. You would
it
need
isn't
to.
What it deserves.
Yeah, it's a back burner for those that are running the ICO. It's also a disadvantage for the BitShares network because if they collected a lot of like a couple million BitUSD, they can still settle, obtain a lot of BTS, sell the BTS, and then you're in the same problem. BitUSD is basically just a relabeled BTS token, nothing else. If they wanted to settle, they can obtain BTS. And they will need to sell BitUSD the same way as they need to sell anything else. It's just a matter of liquidity in the markets.
Well, just one other variation. What if you pre-buy BTS, then announce an ICO? Where you're accepting BitUSD?
That's something different.
Or announce a share drop. I mean, it'll even pump up the value of the holdings that you have.
It's not about the pumping up. That works. It's also if you buy BTS first and then announce stuff like that, the price will probably go up. The problem is not the price going up. The problem is the price going down. And if it goes down too quickly, you may end up in actually doing a black swan in the asset that you have obtained through the ICO. And that's a horrible thing.
There's such hurdles, man. But the tech is there. We just need to build it out a little bit more to get more volume.
You need the liquidity. You need people that are providing BitUSD, and not only the guys that are running the ICO. You need a lot of people that are offering to go short on their BitUSD or something. But basically, we are working on it.
We could go forever on this one. I mean, these topics are good to cover though, because like I was telling everybody earlier, we reached 1,000 views this week on our Hangouts on the SoundCloud account. So we have a lot of people who are listening in, and obviously some who are new. So it's nice to really dig into this. But does that answer your questions, Talkinator, at all, or where do you stand?
Oh, I think it does answer a lot. I guess one question that still lingered for me was Xerox's last point on the black swan possibility. What might trigger that black swan in the scenario that I described?
In that people are using BitUSD, well, it does not trigger a black swan directly. It just if you use BitUSD to raise money for an ICO, then you end up in having a lot of BitUSD. And in order to actually liquidate those into some asset that you can use, you have different ways. First of all, you can sell BitUSD for any other asset. For instance, Tether USD. If you find a seller for Tether USD against BitUSD, currently that market doesn't look that bad, but it cannot handle millions of dollars, I would think. The other way would be to sell it for some other assets if you find a liquid market. But I'm talking about millions of BitUSD. I'm not talking about a couple $1,000s. That's not a big problem. But if you raise millions of dollars, then that's a problem. And for those that are running the ICO, if you have now, let's say, $2 million in BitUSD on BitShares, and you want to liquidate them, the only way you can basically do that if you don't find a buyer for them, is to settle them for BTS. Fortunately, and that's good for us, there is a maximum volume that you can settle per maintenance per day, per day, I think. And that is some, I don't know, 1% or so of the whole supply. So you cannot obtain a lot of BTS right from settling all of your BitUSD if you have a lot. So you cannot obtain a lot of BTS at the same time. So this would lead into the people that are running the ISO to trickle some of those BTS into the market slowly and sell them slowly. So that would probably not end up in a black swan, unless they settle them, wait until everything is settled, and then dump it all in the market, which would be a stupid move anyways, because dumping stuff is less
drive down
profit.
the price for you.
It's not driving the price down. It's oh God, what was the name again? The leakage, is it called leakage effect? You can usually get more if you sell slowly and not instantly.
Forgive my ignorance, but is Open USDT the tethered version of BitUS a bit asset?
No, there is a Open USDT, which is offered by Ronnie and Open Ledger. It's a IOU from Open Ledger, packed or promised to be exchangeable for a real USD Tether.
What is Tether?
Tether is an asset that runs on the Omni network, which is on top of Bitcoin. It's like Counterparty, just different. The protocol used to be called Mastercoin and is now called Omni, the Omni network, and that's running as a kind of a colored coin on top of Bitcoin.
But it's playing the role of a bit asset in the Bitcoin world, is what you're saying.
Yeah, essentially.
It's not a bit asset; it's a user issued asset.
But the attempt of that user issued that it's tied to the US dollar. I mean, it's
but it's not decentralized, which is what Xerox trying to say. It's not like there's a third party there.
Well, that's an important distinction.
So it's UIA.
It goes through Ronnie. If Ronnie loses access to his US Tether, then you basically end up with tokens that are worth less.
Okay, thanks.
By the way, have you ever read you should read the legal details for US Tether, because in there it states that having US Tether does not make you obtain a what's it? There's a legal term for this. You're not you don't have the privilege to. Yeah, they are not obligated to give you the real US dollar for the US Tether.
What are they obligated to give you?
Nothing. Well, I don't know. Could be nothing. I haven't looked into it. Once I saw that paragraph, I stopped reading.
Yeah, I can see why you did.
Yeah, Tether is because you're shareholders and it's a huge liability, but it's not guaranteed, essentially, because they can't guarantee US dollars, because then they would be tied into the whole structure legally. So it has to be at that barrier. It's always tricky.
Indeed.
Well, that's a big distinction, though, right? Sorry, go ahead, talking here.
Well, I have seen quite a few people talking on Telegram from time to time about USDT, and I wasn't sure what that is. So now I understand what that is, but it's a very important distinction because it's not as powerful, it's not as solid, it's not as well backed as a bit asset in the BitShares realm.
Yeah, bit assets are really a beautiful thing. It's crazy.
They are unique in the entire crypto world.
In all of crypto. Even the people who've cloned BitShares have really not understood how to use them.
I mean, from the standpoint that NewBits is doing the same thing as bit assets, they have different rules about it, of course, but it's the same idea, right?
No, they're doing it entirely different. They are basically giving out tokens, and then they are basically trying to find incentives. The one hand side to sell them, on the other to buy them, and then they are building up buy and sell walls to make it peg or appear pegged to the US dollar. It's not like they are. I think it's kind of
like the Federal Reserve in the banking structure, honestly. Only it's on a blockchain.
What's the reason that NewBits has had more liquidity than BitShares USD does?
Well, because you have centralized control. There's like a committee, and you get to kind of like mint your own NewBits and park them away, and you're expected to buy them to keep the market up whenever it needs to be up, and then you're expected to sell some whenever it's going down. I mean, going up. So you're expected to do this to kind of like give you an incentive to try to maintain the peg and have a group of people who decides how much they can create and mint. So there's more centralization. So it's a lot less gravity that you have to fight against to go to, to kind of reach that peak. How do you say it? Network effect. Because let's face it, centralized systems are easier to get there.
It's a matter of how you create trust and where you create it. If for instance there was a bank or a bigger financial institute that were to back a asset with real gold and could verify that claim of the gold with an auditing firm or something, then they win. They have an asset on they basically digitize their physical assets, but they need to establish trust and they need to keep their trust. If they won't screw up and run into fractional or fictional reserves, then this is a end game. But the
they
point
can't
here
get robbed.
the point here is that either you trust an entity or a government or a bank or financial institute or someone, or you trust them and they need to prove that trust, or you trust a smart contract, which a smart coin is basically a smart contract. The point here is that you can see that it is doing what it promises. There's no cheating. There's no going fractional reserve. That's the point. The point is always, where is the trust? Do I trust a person or entity, or do I trust a digitized smart contract where I can read what it is actually doing?
Yeah, great summary.
Yeah. Earlier in the early days of Nubits, we talked about that a lot. You remember Xerox?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was not popular whenever we started talking about it, because Dan even posted something about it, and it kind of upset a lot of the communities because he kind of said it was going to be kind of like a Ponzi type of mechanism. And he turned out to be right for the exact reasons he stated, which were that you can't expect people to buy it up if there's ever a black swan. That committee of people who hold these new shares, is what they were called, would not... At some point in time, they would say, okay, I'm not going to keep buying these up because the market's throwing them at me and I'm losing money. So they have no incentive to keep the peg anymore. So that's why this system was created. But it's so organic and beautiful, but it takes a long time for us to get everything where it needs to be in terms of the volume. But MPAs are the way to go, man. That's what BitShares has, I think. That and a hell of a governance structure.
Who of you has been part of the testnet stress testing? This is a term here. Can you guys remember that in the end we turned out that we had a trouble reaching beyond the 350 transactions per second? I had the impression that that's a combination of this parameter that I changed and not being able to process more transactions, to create more transactions. And I just now, if you want to take a look in the stats page, let me paste a link. In the end, it just turns out that I couldn't create more than 350 transactions per second. That's why we were stuck at that number, at least from my perspective, and I later on never could manage to go beyond that. I have now running, let me count the numbers. I am now running 15 CLI wallets, including stressed production on my local node, which only produces a couple hundred a couple 10 to 50 transactions per second. I'm running a fat node that is on a witness node to produce transactions. That's running almost 300 transactions per second. And I'm now having yet another node that's again running 15 CLI wallets to produce transactions. And it seems that it's not really a backend stuff that was holding us back, but really more the amount of participants and the machines that we use to create the transactions. That said, the network is currently processing almost 3,000 transactions in a block on 3 seconds blocks, which is approximately 1,000 transactions per second. This is promising because it tells me that in contrast to what I said last time after the stress testing, the bottleneck is probably not in the back end, nor it does not seem to be in the peer-to-peer node either. The real bottleneck actually, and that is funny, is probably in the block production actually, which is kind of clear because producing signed transactions is more effort, more cumbersome than verifying transactions.
But if that is the case, then since we had many generators, wouldn't we have gotten around that problem?
Yeah, the problem back then was that some of the witness nodes probably haven't had the whole patch included that would have allowed them to collect more of the transactions in the peer-to-peer node. I since made a couple more harsh changes in the code that really removed all of these thresholds for the network, for the peer-to-peer network. So the code that I'm currently running is entirely running full speed, and I also replaced all of the witness nodes. So basically the witnesses that are currently producing blocks on the testnet are run on a single machine. There's a single machine producing the blocks. And not really a peer-to-peer network. That's why, on the other hand, it's not really fair to compare. But I think, well, it could still be that there's some stuff. Well, I'm not sure whether it's in the peer-to-peer network because I still, even though the witnesses are running on the same node, I'm using 3 nodes to throw transactions into the peer-to-peer network. You understand what I mean?
Yes, I do understand what you mean. I just think, So I think perhaps related to that point, point 1, since they are 3 different nodes on one machine, I think they would still be using the peer-to-peer protocol.
Yep.
But then this also, have you had a chance to read G Chicken's comment? Because it reminds me of something that I think perhaps it was him or perhaps someone else who said this, that there's also the issue of there are times when we can get high transactions. I'll read it in just for audio. G Chicken here says, I ran 5 generation nodes with roughly 7 client wallets overall and managed to get 10,000 per block, 10,000 transactions per block, I assume. But once we all got started stress testing, I could not achieve these numbers again, despite the same amount of PCs.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah. That's okay. I'm going to look into that. I can tell you this far that I'm currently running. Okay, let me do the numbers. There's 1 local, 1 on Piston, 1 on Lantier. I'm running 45 CLI wallets in total on 3 different machines, and all of them running full speed, 1 operation per transaction transfers. So that's 45 CLI wallets connected to 3 nodes. 3 nodes, 2 nodes, I can't remember. 3 nodes, probably. Anyways, the results are looking more promising than I expected when we finished our stress testing on the network. Even though it's a different setup because it's a more centralized block production, and I would guess that the other 2 nodes, the other 2 witness nodes, are probably interconnected with that witness by a big fat fiber. All of the nodes that I'm currently using for stress testing are hosted by the same hosting company, even though they are not in the same data center. Anyways, just wanted to let you know that it seems that our code is actually doing way better than we saw at the end of our public stress test. I'm still trying to figure out what the bottlenecks have been during our stress testing.
Thanks for that. That looks really interesting. I mean, the outcome. So keep us in the loop, please.
Well, 1,000 bundles of transactions at a time seems like it's pretty decent start. So I think we're in at least a decent place.
We probably need to wrap up here and get started with the. But on the other hand, I did wanted to close with this: that Xerox, have you any ETA on when the next stress test or testnet will be going on?
No, I have no ETA.
Okay, next time I'm going to be better prepared. That's the reason I'm asking. I thought I was going to be prepared, but once things got started, then I got locked out just because of the stress test going on. So next time I'll be a little more careful next time.
I hope that I can provide better documentation for people that are new in the witness stuff, and I hope that I can find a couple patches that allow us to increase the throughput by then. It's not entirely your fault. I could have documented the whole procedure a little better from to begin with.
You do it, Xerox. I'll make a video of it, buddy, because I'm going to do it myself. But anyway, with that said, I do want to actually close on something else. The whole concept of the community building activities, which is kind of my strongest areas. So what I do want to say is this. Chris mentioned that I should make sure that we talk a little bit about it today. Obviously, we got into some pretty important stuff. So what I will say is this. I'll just boil it down into iterating the importance that we use the tools that we have right now. We have Steam, which is a good platform for us to promote BitShares. So what I will say is, I know I'm kind of a whale. I'm a little orca, and I can hit hard if I want to. I can't always for political reasons, but I will definitely support anybody who joins these Hangouts and has a solid post about BitShares or something that happened in one of these Hangouts. If you post to the BitShares and Beyond Bitcoin tags, share it in here. I will make sure to upvote it, and if it's really good, I'll pass it around to people who I really hope will upvote it for you. So let's do that, and make sure to support the projects that we have, and let's create some buzz and share that those pieces of content on other social media platforms. We leverage our networks, and it's a huge explosion into the minds of the men and women who see all this content. We just have to make sure that we get it out. So with that said, thank you, everybody, and the assignment for next week: have a good BitShares based piece of content. It can be humorous, it can be anything else, but make sure that it's factual. And with that said, thank you guys very much for this week. I believe Chris will be back next week running this, but I will be here to serve as kind of the person who's doing this part of the assignment. So with that said, have a good one.